In 1986, Nintendo released a title you may have heard of called Metroid. It was an open world platformer and yada yada yada, everyone knows this story by now. At the end of the game, for players who managed to beat it in record time, it was revealed that our space hero that the manual constantly referred to as male was actually a woman the whole time. Cue millions of shocked children finding out the cool robot man they thought they were playing as this whole time was a lady all along. Nowadays, everyone knows that Samus is a woman. Not only has her power armor gotten more feminine as the years go on, but all Metroid games since Super onwards don't even bother trying to hide it. And with Super Smash Bros. Having a suitless version of Samus playable since 2008, is something even non-Metroid fans are aware of. But what might be less known, at least to the vast majority of Nintendo fans, and especially more recent fans, is that Samus wasn't Nintendo's first ambiguously gendered protagonist. And no, I don't mean Birdo either, she debuted in 1987, silly, she's not even a protagonist at this point. I'm talking about Mach Rider. This guy. Or is it a gal? Nobody knows for sure, and unlike Samus, where it was definitively stated outright, things are a bit more ambiguous here, with arguments on both sides. They might not always be strong arguments, but let's tackle that in a moment. It wouldn't surprise me if some of you watching didn't even know who or what a Mach Rider was, especially given that the game isn't on Nintendo Switch Online yet. So here is the Nintendo Chronicler history segment on the series. There isn't a lot, so it'll be very quick. Mach Rider is one of those few Nintendo franchises that began life not as a video game, but as a toy. In 1972, Nintendo released the Mach Rider toy, a little plastic race car that you launch forward by pulling a lever. It's based on a Hasbro toy called the Yellowtail Funny Car, and really, outside of the name, it has nothing to do with the game that would release 13 years later. It's only relevant because, like Wild Gunman and Duck Hunt, Nintendo was looking to the toys it had manufactured in the 70s and trying to convert them into video games. There are two games in the Mach Rider series, the NES and Famicom title that most players are familiar with, and then the Nintendo vs Arcade Machine vs Mach Rider. There were two versions of this machine, the Fighting Course version and the Endurance Course version. The NES version of this game includes both of these modes together in one title, and then the Famicom version even has a custom track maker, where courses could be saved using the Famicom data recorder. This feature would eventually become worldwide in every virtual console release of the game, except on 3DS, for some reason. While most people point to the NES version as the original game, launching in August of 1985 in Japan, this actually isn't true. With a lot of Nintendo Vs games, they were actually made for arcades first and then adapted for the Famicom at the exact same time. Nintendo themselves would work on the arcade version in-house, while a third party, HAL Laboratories in this case, worked on the Famicom version. This is actually important to today's topic because of one key difference between both versions: the windscreen. In HAL Lab's NES port of the game, when you beat a level, the game would automatically move on to the next one. But in the original arcade release, you would get a picture of Mach Rider standing next to their bike, gun in hand. But the further you got into the game and more levels you beat, the Mach Rider was replaced with a sexy woman in a leotard holding a knife. It is very reminiscent of the Samus reveal in the original Metroid. The character standing in the same place as Mach Rider with Mach Rider nowhere to be seen really makes it feel like this was intended to confirm that this cool masculine hero was a woman under the helmet all along. Case closed. However, it's not as clear cut it seems. Now, I wasn't around for the Samus reveal when that happened, but between the animation showing the suit come off, the Justin Bailey code, and then later games not even attempting to hide the gender reveal, it's basically impossible to claim that Samus is actually a man, and that the game is just swapping him out for a lady just for a victory screen. That argument doesn't fly. However, in Mach Rider's case, there are no more games in the series, and the NES version, the one most people are familiar with and played, doesn't have this reveal. If you played Mach Rider back in the day and only the NES version, you would have no reason to think that Mach Rider was anything but a man. I mean, just look at these abs and pecs. Women can look like this, but back in the 80s, this was absolutely what people would have said a man's body looked like. And unlike Samus, there is no armour here. It's a motorbike outfit that seemingly forms to the body shape. This is enough evidence for most, but the real nail in the coffin for the gender debate argument is the Melee trophy for Mach Rider. His. Super Smash Bros. Uses male pronouns for Mach Rider. This is an official source from Nintendo, so surely there can be no room for doubt. But ooh, you in the audience who know Japanese, you know what I'm gonna say next, don't you? Let's look at the Japanese description of this trophy. It's basically the same, but anyone who knows Japanese knows that they don't do pronouns. They have words to describe gender, like boy and girl, princess and prince, etc. But no he, she, him, her, and in this case, his. There is no gendered words here, it's ambiguous. Back in the day when gender wasn't considered such a hot button issue, the default for Nintendo in this case was to just use male pronouns rather than they them. Kirby, our gender neutral puffball, is the perfect example of this. And given Mach Rider's masculine physique, I wouldn't be surprised if the localizer just assumed Mach Rider is male, and the character is such a minor part of the game and Nintendo history in general that nobody even thought twice about it. And that really throws the Mach Rider is male argument into question, because if the Melee description is inaccurate, then the only evidence for male is the physique. But okay, what about the argument for Mach Rider being a girl? I've only shown the one end screen, and that's all there is for the argument, so it's also not that conclusive. Well, that would be the case if it was the only argument, but it's not. There are two more pieces of evidence for Mach Rider actually being a woman under that helmet. The first is an officially licensed poster from Nintendo for the Japanese gaming magazine High Score Media Work that portrays the Mach Rider as a woman. No male physique this time, the jacket is zipped down, the helmet is off. This is a feminine physique, and we know it's Mach Rider because of the bike in the back and the belt that says M Rider, and well, it says Mach Rider. But I can see the arguments against this. It might be officially licensed by Nintendo, but it's not in the game. It's a poster designed to attract readers to buy the game, and magazine, and sex sells, so having a sexy biker lady would draw more people in than having the actual Mach Rider himself. It's like that artwork of female Link from that other Japanese magazine. Link's not a girl, but they made him one here, so perhaps the same has happened in this case? Well, okay, fine. But what about Captain Rainbow? The cult classic Wii game saw the return of many forgotten Nintendo characters, and at one point Mach Rider was going to be a part of this. We have a model of the character that's fully animated, and it's obviously, once again, a female physique. This time it's in a game that was being published by Nintendo and had their characters, and this one is more recent than the original game, so surely this is the current stance, right? Well, it being cut content throws another wrench into this, because by its nature it is no longer official. We don't know why Mach Rider was cut, but she was, and to some that acts as a disqualification to the gender debate. Maybe she was cut because Nintendo disagreed with this version of her made by Skip, or maybe it was just time constraints, who knows. And that is it for female evidence. There is more of it than the argument for Mach Rider being a man, but its nature leaves room for argument of form, and that's why this debate has still gone on to this day. Personally, between the two, I would prefer Mach Rider pull a Samus and actually be a badass biker lady. It's far more interesting to me. On a related note, I would love to have that Mach Rider poster, so if anyone knows where they can set me up with one, let me know. However, there is another option, and one I prefer, one that might be the actual canon here. In the Mach Rider instruction manual, the story is very minimalistic, and is also gender neutral. But it does say this. It's the year 2112. The Earth has been invaded by the forces of evil. Battle with the invading forces as you race from sector to sector searching for survivors. You are the Earth's only hope. You are Mach Rider. Mach Rider doesn't have a defined gender because the player is Mach Rider. Whatever gender you identify with is the gender of Mach Rider, and Nintendo can get away with this because Mach Rider is kind of like the Stig from Top Gear. No one knows what they look like under the helmet, they never speak, they have an air of mystery. And if Nintendo ever brings back Mach Rider, this is the approach I would want them to take. Let the player decide Mach Rider's gender, Mach Rider's pronouns, make Mach Rider the ultimate player stand-in, because they can be. This might be a cop-out to some, but I think it's cool. Nintendo has been doing more for gender equality in its games recently, with Animal Crossing's cool and cute substitutes being a great example. Mach Rider is an enigma, and I want it to stay that way in the games. I don't want an official confirmation, I want them to remain as Nintendo's ambiguously gendered biker.